Okay, so get this. You have a guy who orchestrates a massive financial fraud, costs regular investors hundreds of millions of dollars, and gets convicted as a felon. He ends up serving just 22 months in a minimum security prison. And then what happens? Hollywood makes a blockbuster movie about him, and he becomes a global celebrity. It's the absolutely wild story of Jordan Belfort, a man who scammed America and then turned around and sold that very story back to us for millions more.
And this quote from the man himself, wow, it really hits you, doesn't it? It's part confession, part excuse, and it's definitely a challenge. He's basically saying, sure, I did it, but aren't you a little bit like me? It forces us to ask a really uncomfortable question. Why are we so fascinated by guys like this? Well, let's dive in and see how it all started.
To really understand the wolf, you have to go back to the beginning. We're talking about a kid from Queens who, from a very early age, had one and only one singular obsession: getting filthy rich. Now, this tells you everything you need to know. At just 16 years old, he's not mowing lawns, he's pulling in 20 grand in one summer selling Italian ices. Think about that. Then there's the dental school story, which is just classic. He lasts one day, the dean tells the class they won't get rich as dentists, and Belfort literally walks out and never comes back. And his meat-selling business? It was a huge success, right before it went completely bankrupt. But in that failure, he found his superpower. The guy realized he could sell absolutely anything to anyone. So this natural-born salesman finally makes it to Wall Street, gets his first real taste of the big leagues, and then, boom, Black Monday 1987. The market completely implodes. For most people, it was a total disaster. For Jordan Belfort, it was the biggest opportunity of his life. He got fired from his legit stockbroking job and stumbled right into the financial Wild West, the completely unregulated world of penny stocks. And this is where the story takes a very dark turn. This is where ambition curdles into straight-up crime. He didn't just find a little niche in the market. He built an entire empire from scratch, designed for the sole purpose of exploiting it. And here's the illusion, right from the start. Stratton Oakmont. It sounds so official, so prestigious, like it's been on Wall Street for 100 years. The reality? It was a bunch of guys in a chaotic office in a Long Island strip mall. He hired his old neighborhood buddies and dropouts, people he knew he could mold into a ruthless sales army.
So what was his weapon of choice? Penny stocks. All you need to remember are two things about them. They're incredibly high risk, and they're almost completely unregulated. These are shares in tiny, obscure companies that are often totally worthless. And because they're not on the major stock exchanges, they are ridiculously easy to manipulate. They were the perfect vehicle for his scam.
And this is how they did it, the classic pump and dump. It's brutally simple. First, the pump. Stratton would secretly buy up tons of shares in some junk stock for pennies. Then, Belfort's brokers would get on the phones and use his aggressive sales scripts to create a massive, artificial hype, convincing unsuspecting investors to buy in and drive the price sky high. And then, the dump. Once the price peaked, they would sell all of their shares at once, making millions in minutes. The stock would instantly crash, leaving all of their clients holding worthless paper.
The scam wasn't just successful, it was a gusher. The money that came pouring in was almost unimaginable. And it didn't just create wealth, it fueled a level of excess that's honestly hard to even comprehend.
The Stratton Oakmont office wasn't a business. It was a zoo. Imagine a trading floor that ran on pure testosterone, greed, and an unbelievable amount of drugs. Belfort built this cult-like environment where the top sellers were treated like gods. He'd throw cash and Rolexes at them, but if you weren't selling, you were publicly humiliated. His whole philosophy was simple and brutal. If you're not winning, you're nothing.
$110 million. That is the official amount of money the courts ordered Jordan Belfort to pay back to the more than 1,500 victims of his schemes. The obvious question, of course, is, where did all that money really go?
Well, it sure didn't go back to the victims. It went here. Mansions, Lamborghinis, a private helicopter he'd crash in his own front yard. It went to a massive 167-foot yacht he named after his supermodel wife. It funded a lifestyle so unbelievably over the top, it became legendary. The disconnect between what he owed and how he lived is just staggering.
But here's the thing about an empire built on lies, adrenaline, and mountains of cocaine: it can't last. As the money piled higher and higher, so did the problems. The feds were closing in from the outside, and the whole thing was starting to rot from the inside.
Just hiding the money became a full-time job. Belfort liked to call it asset protection. The FBI, they had a simpler term for it: money laundering. We're talking about a complex maze of fake companies, secret Swiss bank accounts, and even paying people to literally strap cash to their bodies and smuggle it into Europe.
At the exact same time, his personal life was just spiraling into chaos. His drug addiction was out of control. There were horrible incidents, like him crashing his Ferrari while he was high, with his toddler daughter in the passenger seat. But the most insane example? He drunkenly forced his yacht captain to sail into a giant Mediterranean storm, which, surprise, caused the yacht to sink. They had to be rescued by the Italian Navy. He was losing control of everything.
And while Belfort was busy self-destructing, FBI agent Gregory Coleman was just patiently, methodically building the case against him. But the real death blow came from inside his own crew. The very brokers he'd made into millionaires started flipping, cooperating with the FBI, wearing wires and recording everything. The betrayal was absolute. Finally, in October of 1996, federal agents raided Stratton Oakmont and the party was over.
So the chase is over. The bad guy is caught. But this is where the story takes its most unbelievable turn. Because for Jordan Belfort, getting busted wasn't the end of his story. It was just the beginning of Act 2.
This chart just says it all, doesn't it? Belfort was facing up to 30 years in federal prison. 30 years! But he did what he does best. He cut a deal. He rolled over on everybody he knew. And the result? He served just 22 months in what's often described as a country club minimum security prison.
So how do you pull off that kind of reinvention? It's incredible. While he's in prison, his cellmate, and I am not making this up, is Tommy Chong of Cheech and Chong fame. Chong tells him, "Your stories are hilarious. You should write a book." So he does, and his memoir, The Wolf of Wall Street, isn't an apology. It's a celebration of his crimes. It becomes a bestseller, then it gets turned into a huge movie, and suddenly this convicted felon is a household name, rebranding himself as a sales guru and motivational speaker. But while Belfort was on his redemption tour, let's not forget the people whose lives were wrecked to pay for his yachts and parties. They lost everything: their retirement funds, their kids' college savings. Many of them never got a dime of that restitution money back. They were just left with debt and ruin. And needless to say, there were no movie deals or book tours for them. Which brings us right back around to that first quote and this final question. Belfort's story is a wild ride, no doubt about it. But maybe it's also a mirror. Why do we, as a culture, celebrate the charismatic outlaw? Why do we so often lionize the rule breakers and forget the people they hurt? Maybe it's because, like he said, he knows there's a little bit of that greed, that desire to win at all costs inside all of us. And that's a pretty uncomfortable thought to end on, isn't it?